They called the convoy route the Spine. 300 kilometers of cracked asphalt threading through what used to be the Bay Area. Now a gray scar of collapsed towers and ammonia wind, and the kind of silence that settles after every living thing that could flee already has. The Verith had taken San Francisco in 9 hours. 9 hours to end 400 years of a city. 9 hours, and then the slow, deliberate work of extraction. Fuel depots gutted, aquifers tapped down to bedrock. The arterial infrastructure of human survival siphoned into their bellied transport ships like blood from a still warm body. Hayden ran the Spine twice a week. She'd done it for 3 years. Her rig was a repurposed water hauler, armor-plated with stripped Verith hull panels she'd salvaged herself from a crash site outside Daly City. Black and slightly iridescent, the way oil looks in a puddle. The other runners called it the Widow. She didn't argue. The name fit the thing she'd become. She was 4 kilometers past the Millbrae checkpoint when the escort drone went dark. No warning. No distress ping. It just stopped transmitting, the way a person stops mid-sentence when something hits them in the chest. She kept her hands on the wheel, kept her speed, noted the time. The Spine ran through a stretch she called the corridor. Elevated highway, walls on both sides, no exits for 6 kilometers. A choke point. The kind of geography that made military planners nervous and gave ambush specialists religious experiences. She'd been through it 100 times. She adjusted her mirror. Nothing. She adjusted it again. 3 bikes materialized from behind the collapsed overpass, running dark, no lights, and she felt something old and familiar settle into her chest. Not fear, exactly. More like recognition. The sensation of a door you've walked through before, the knob worn smooth from your own hand. She keyed the radio. Dead. Of course. The bike spread out into a delta formation behind her, closing. She could see the rider in the middle, the one with the white and black face markings, leaning forward with the particular patience of someone who had done this math before and was comfortable with the answer. Hayden pressed the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb. She had 4 tanks of fuel on board, enough to run the city's water reclamation plant for 11 days. The Verith had been running raids on the reclamation supply chain for 6 months, systematically, methodically, the way they did everything, which was the way a scalpel does things precisely and without heat. They didn't need the fuel, they needed the city to run out of it. A slow collapse was easier to administer than a fast one, less resistance, less noise. Hayden had no plan to let them have it. The lead rider on the bike, the one with the marked face, pulled alongside the cab window. She glanced over, woman, maybe 30. Tricorn hat that looked like it had survived something that the rest of the world hadn't. A katana strapped across her back, hilt above her shoulder, handle worn to the color of old bone. She made the gesture, pull over, hand flat, push downward, calm as a crossing guard. Hayden gave her a different gesture. The woman smiled. The smile did not reach her eyes, which were doing something more complicated. A kind of measurement, the way a carpenter looks at wood before cutting. Then she pulled back and the rear 2 bikes accelerated to flank the rig. Hayden hit the secondary panel under the dash, the one that didn't exist on any factory schematic, and felt the Widow shudder as the rear deck reconfigured. She'd spent 3 months on the modification with a mechanic named Priya, who had 3 fingers on her left hand, and opinions about engineering that bordered on theological. The Widow had surprises. Not weapons. The Accord prohibited weapons on civilian supply runs, because the Accord had been written by people who believed in the Accord. But surprises. The rear deck vented. Steam. 300 liters of it, superheated to a temperature that turned the air white and opaque for 2 full seconds, billowing back in a wall that a speeding motorcycle, running dark, could not react to in time. She heard the bikes hit the barrier. Not explosions, not deaths. She'd calibrated the pressure carefully. Priya had opinions about that too. Impact sounds, metal on concrete. The sounds of machines becoming very suddenly stationary. 1 bike remained, the one with the marked face. Hayden waited. The woman, she'd started thinking of her as the carpenter, didn't crash, didn't swerve. She'd been trailing slightly wider than the others. A subtle variance in positioning that Hayden had clocked and filed away, and now understood had not been accidental. The carpenter had anticipated it. Not the steam specifically, but something. She'd held position that allowed for a contingency she couldn't name. That was interesting. The carpenter pulled alongside again. This time she didn't make gestures. She held up something instead. A flat metal rectangle the size of a playing card, and even through the vibration of the rig and the dirty light of the corridor, Hayden could see the sigil stamped into it. Circular, layered, The kind of symbol that meant something to the people who used it and nothing to people who hadn't been briefed. She'd been briefed. It was a Verith Extraction Authority mark. It meant the bearer had permission, direct, hierarchical, traceable to the top permission, to commandeer human civilian resources in the service of Verith reclamation operations. It meant your cargo belongs to them now. It meant they got there first. Hayden stared at it for 3 full seconds. She thought about the reclamation plant, about the 11 days, about the 4,000 people inside the perimeter who needed the water processed and the pumps running. She thought about the particular mathematics of desperation, which she had studied at close range for 3 years, and which had a logic to it, a cold and navigable logic that she'd learned to move inside like a fish moves in a current, not fighting it, using it. She thought about the carpenter's eyes, the measurement in them. She hit the intercom. You have one. A pause. The carpenter's voice through the window, raised over the engine noise, was accented with something she couldn't place. Central American, maybe, or something that used to be Central American before the coastal flooding. One what? One reason, Hayden said. Give me one reason you're running cargo for them and I'll pull over. Another pause. Longer. My brother, the carpenter said. Hayden pulled over. They were parked in the lee of a collapsed pedestrian bridge, the widow cooling with its particular sequence of ticks and hisses, the carpenter sitting on her bike with the engine off and her marked face tilted slightly up, looking at the sky, which was the color of old newspaper. The katana lay across her thighs like she'd forgotten about it. He was in the processing center in Oakland, the carpenter said, when they expanded the extraction perimeter. Hayden knew about the processing centers. She knew the way you know about a thing you cannot look directly at. That authority mark, she said. Where'd you get it? Took it from an administrator, 12 kilometers east of here. He's alive. A pause. Annoyed but alive. Hayden looked at her. You're not running cargo for them. No, you're running the mark, testing where it opens doors. She kept her voice flat. The flatness was doing work. What kind of doors? The carpenter reached into her jacket and produced a folded piece of actual paper, rare enough to be its own statement, paper being what it was now, and held it out. Hayden took it, unfolded it, looked at it for a long time. It was a schematic, hand-drawn but precise, the lines of someone trained in drafting, or something adjacent to it, with the careful notation of measurements and angles that meant the person drawing had stood in the space and taken real numbers. It showed a facility she recognized from the outer boundary of the restricted zone, Verith architecture, unmistakable even in ink. The rounded geometries that looked organic and were not, the concentric aperture design of their secured storage structures. In the center of the schematic, circled 3 times in heavy ink, was a chamber labeled in human handwriting, Fuel Reclamation Holding, Tier 1. She looked up. The carpenter was watching her with those measuring eyes. How much? Hayden asked. Enough to run the city for 4 months. Maybe 5. She said it the way someone says an amount of money they've thought about so many times it has lost its emotional charge and become simply a number. They've been holding it since the 3rd month of occupation. A reserve, in case the extraction operation needed on-site resupply. And you want to move it. I want to get my brother out, the carpenter said. The fuel is a consequence. Hayden folded the schematic along its original creases, held it, felt the weight of what paper weighed now, which was nothing and everything simultaneously. The mark, she said. It opens the outer gates, 2 of the 3 checkpoints, and the 3rd, the carpenter said nothing, which was its own answer. Hayden thought about the widow, about Priya's 3 fingers and her opinions, about a modification she'd made to the cargo manifesting system 8 months ago, on a night when she had too much time and not enough to do with it, that she had never needed and had begun to believe she never would. I know someone, she said. Priya had a workshop in a building that used to be a parking structure, 6 levels of concrete that the Verith had deemed structurally insufficient for repurposing and therefore invisible to their administrative interest. She occupied level 4 with a generator, 3 pallets of spare parts, a collection of pre-occupation technical manuals she treated with the reverence other people reserved for religious texts, and a tabby cat named Solvency, who was missing 1 ear and operated with the focused intensity of an animal that had made decisions about its life. She looked at the schematic for 40 seconds. Then she looked at Hayden. Then she looked at the carpenter, who had introduced herself as Mott, which was either a name or a call sign, and in the current world, the distinction had mostly collapsed. The 3rd checkpoint, Priya said, runs Verith biometric authentication, Tier 1 facilities require a live organism with valid biological markers, specifically, a member of the Verath administrative caste. She set the schematic down with the care of someone handling something that might bite them. You don't have one of those? No, Hayden agreed. You're going to tell me the Widow's manifest system can spoof it. It can generate an administrative clearance signature in Verath encryption format. That's not the same as biometrics. No. But their authentication system has a 12-second window between biometric scan failure and lockdown trigger. A system that old. They installed it during the first year of occupation. They hadn't updated the escalation protocol. I checked the revision logs. Clesh copy from a security contractor's drive I lifted outside Palo Alto. She paused. 12 seconds. Priya was quiet for a long time. Solvency walked across the schematic. 12 seconds, Priya repeated, in the tone of someone taking the measure of a very small room. You'd need to insert a clearance packet through their administrative network at the exact moment of scan failure. 12 seconds to tunnel, authenticate as a low-tier bureaucratic process, and unlock the door. You'd need access to their network to do that. Hayden nodded at Mott. The mark. It gives us access to the administrative subnet, one level down from what we need but connected. Priya put both hands flat on the workbench. She had 3 fingers on her left hand, and she laid them out deliberately, like she was counting. If the escalation triggers, she said, the facility goes to full lockdown, every door, every gate, everything on site, including the processing hold. Yes, and you'd be inside. Yes, with 4,000 liters of Verath-held fuel and 1 man in a processing hold and a 12-second window. 11. By the time the packet authenticates. Priya looked at her for a very long time. I'll need 6 hours, she said. They went in at 0300, which was when the Verath administrative rotation changed, and the outgoing shift filed its completion reports, creating a 7-minute window in which the network was doing internal reconciliation and external monitoring was, in Priya's exact words, taking its eyes off the street. The widow ran without lights. Mott rode beside her, the bike's engine tuned down to a murmur, the katana still across her back. The outer gate opened on the mark. Smooth. Automated deference. The Verath built their systems to recognize authority and yield to it instantly, reflexively, the way a body responds to a familiar face. It was a form of institutional trust that worked perfectly until the authority mark was wrong. The second checkpoint the same. The third was a wall. Not literally, it was a gate. The same curved Verath architecture as the others. The same bioluminescent markings at the edges that pulsed with the slow rhythm of something almost biological. But it was a wall in every way that mattered. Hayden pulled up to the scanner. The widow's systems engaged. She heard the sound of the scan begin, a subsonic hum she felt more than heard, in the fillings of her teeth and the bones of her wrists. Then the failure tone, clean, sharp, unmistakable. Now, Priya's voice said in her earpiece. Priya, 2 kilometers back on a hill with a directional antenna and the kind of focused attention she usually reserved for her manuals. Go. The packet went. Hayden watched the gate. She counted. 1, 2, 3. At 4 she was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she usually wasn't, as though her body had decided this was a relevant moment to make itself known to her. 7, 8. Mott beside her had one hand on the katana hilt, not drawn, just touching it. The same way you touch a familiar thing in a dark room, not for use, for the reminder that it's there. 11. The gate opened. They were moving before it finished. The processing hold was exactly where the schematics said it would be. But schematics don't prepare you for scale, and the scale of the chamber was the kind of thing that rearranged your sense of proportion. Ceiling 20 meters up, rows of sealed storage units, each one the size of a shipping container, each one faintly warm to the hand, radiating the stored energy of human infrastructure. Hundreds of them. The mathematics of how long this city could run unwound themselves in her mind before she could stop them, and what they added up to was a different kind of number than she'd expected. Not 4 months, more than that, much more. Mott was moving already, past the first row, reading the processing unit markers with the practiced speed of someone who had memorized a very specific piece of information and was now deploying it against reality. 3rd row, she said, far end. The processing hold wasn't for fuel. Hayden had understood this somewhere around the 2nd checkpoint, assembling the pieces that didn't fit. The schematic's circular marking, the way Mott had phrased it, the precision of the number she'd given for the fuel when the fuel wasn't actually the thing she was looking for. The processing hold was for data, specifically, for people the Verath had decided were more valuable as information than as labor, and whom they were holding in a form of suspended administrative status while their extraction value was assessed. The containers weren't fuel tanks, they were file cabinets. The man inside the third-row unit, far end, was unconscious in the Verith way, not injured, not dying, just paused, held in the particular metabolic suspension the Verith used for long-term information storage, which was its own kind of horror that she had no language for and no time to look at. Mott had language for it. She had had 3 years to find language for it. She put her hand on the release panel and then stopped, looked at Hayden. "They'll know," she said. "The moment the unit opens the manifest flags, they'll know something was removed. Yes, the lockdown triggers then, not in 12 seconds, in 3, yes." A pause. "You knew this," Mott said. "Yes." The pause stretched out into something with texture to it. "Why did you come anyway?" Hayden thought about 11 days, about the water plant, about the specific mathematics she'd been living inside for 3 years, which had a logic to it, a cold and navigable logic, except for the moments when the logic broke open and underneath was something that wasn't logic at all, something older, something that made you pull over for a woman on a bike who gave you one reason instead of the authority mark. "Because you said, brother," she said. Mott opened the unit, 3 seconds exactly before the alert sounded. Not a sound she'd heard before, nothing like human alarms, more like a pressure change, a shift in the ambient resonance of the facility, as though the building itself had inhaled. Then the lockdown began. She'd expected sealed doors. That's what lockdown meant in human facilities. Containment, geometry working against you. The Verith lockdown was different. The doors sealed, yes, but the sealing was total and instant and complete. And then the lights changed, shifting from the operational spectrum into something narrower and redder. And she understood that was because the Verith, equivalent of armed response, was being notified. And armed response was 2 minutes out at minimum, and 2 minutes was a number she'd built for. Mott had her brother over her shoulder, conscious now, partially making sounds that weren't words yet. He was smaller than she'd expected. That was always the thing. With people you'd constructed into architecture in your mind, they were always smaller. Hayden hit the secondary panel, not steam this time. The Widow's cargo bay, via remote, was reconfiguring in the lot outside. Priya had worked through 6 of her 8 allocated hours on this specific mechanism, explaining it to Hayden with the cadence of someone who was both furious and very proud simultaneously, using words that Hayden only partially understood but had nodded through with the confidence of a person who trusts the furniture even if they didn't build it. The Widow's external cargo ramp was extending. The Widow's emergency power coupling, civilian-rated innocuous, listed on every manifest as a standard infrastructure support tool, was interfacing with the facility's power grid through the administrative subnet access the Mark had provided, which meant the Widow was drawing power from the facility, all of it, not weapons, not destructive, just a load transfer, civilian-rated, perfectly legal under the Accord, running at the maximum civilian-rated draw, which was a number Priya had pointed out was technically within spec, but which she had also pointed out, in the same breath, would pull the facility's entire auxiliary grid for approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds of a facility that ran on alien power management architecture, suddenly asked to output at maximum civilian draw to an external load, while simultaneously running a lockdown protocol. Something Priya had explained with great precision would give. The lights went out, not the red ones, all of them. The doors, which were Verith design and required powered actuation in both directions, were now neither locked nor unlocked. They were simply inert. Mott didn't ask. She drew the katana and put the hilt through the door mechanism with the practiced efficiency of someone who had thought about this specific problem before, and the door moved. They moved with it. The lot was 60 meters of open ground, and 60 meters of open ground in a facility that had just gone dark and triggered armed response was 60 meters of open ground that did not have a lot of patience for deliberation. They ran. Mott ran with her brother across her shoulders and didn't slow down, which told Hayden something about what the last 3 years had built into the muscle and bone of the woman, something load-bearing and non-negotiable. The katana was back in its sheath, both hands on her brother. The Widow's ramp was down. Hayden drove. She drove the spine in reverse, which was not something the spine was designed for, and which the Widow was not designed for either, but which the Widow accommodated with the compliance of a machine that had been made to accommodate things it wasn't designed for. Modifications and adaptations and years of being asked to be more than its schematic, and it gave her what she needed in the same way it always had. Not elegantly, not without complaint, but continuously. Behind them, the facility's lights came back on. One by one, patient, systematic. The way the Verith did everything, which was the way a scalpel does things. She was already 600 meters down the spine by then, running without lights, running on muscle memory, and the knowledge of every crack and camber in 300 kilometers of broken asphalt. Priya's voice in her ear, talking her through the checkpoints, the timing, the gaps in the Verith patrol rotation that existed. Because patrol rotations are designed by administrators and administrators designed for normal conditions, and the humans running through the gaps had spent 3 years studying what normal conditions left unguarded. Mott's brother's name was Kale. She learned this an hour later, parked in a drainage culvert 2 kilometers east of the checkpoint. Engine off. Listening to the patrol sweeps thin out as the Verith concluded the extraction had gone east into the hills. He was conscious by then, sitting against the widow's interior wall, looking at his sister with the particular expression of a person who has been paused for a long time, and is now loading the world back in piece by piece. The fuel, Mott said. She wasn't looking at Hayden, she was looking at her brother's face. I told you 4 months. I know. I was being conservative. I was trying not to sound insane. I know, a pause. They've been holding 6 months of supply in that facility. Maybe more. They weren't going to use it. They were going to let the city run down to nothing and then. I know, Hayden said. She did know. She had done the math in the widow in the dark, over the spine, twice a week for 3 years. She had been doing the math since the first month of occupation, before she understood what the math added up to. The Verith were not brutal. That was the thing people didn't understand, who hadn't studied them up close. They weren't brutal. They were methodical. They extracted what they needed, and they let the remainder collapse under its own weight, slowly, without drama, and they called that efficiency. The math, followed to its conclusion, told you what they were planning. She'd been trying not to look at the conclusion for 3 years. The data you transmitted, she said. Priya received it. Mott looked up. The facility's internal network. While we were inside, the administrative subnet access gave us a read window. Priya ran a sweep. Hayden looked at the wall of the culvert, concrete, old, cracked in the specific pattern of something that had settled over decades. She found the holding records. 6 facilities. Bay Area, same structure, same holdings, a silence. 6, Mott said. 6. Kale made a sound, small, reflexive. The sound a person makes when a number doesn't fit the space they've made for it. The mark, Hayden said. How many more did the administrator have? Mott reached into her jacket, laid them on the widow's floor between them. Flat metal rectangles, the size of playing cards, faintly iridescent, 8 of them. Hayden looked at them for a long time. She thought about 6 facilities, about the math, about the 3 years of twice-weekly runs along 300 kilometers of cracked asphalt, doing the Verith's version of useful, being the mechanism of a slow collapse she'd been too busy surviving to fully see. She thought about Priya, about a mechanic with 3 fingers on her left hand who had opinions about engineering that bordered on theological, about what you could build if you stopped building for the circumstances you had and started building for the conclusion you could now see. 8 marks, 6 facilities. Solvency, the one-eared cat, was going to be very annoyed with them. She picked up the marks. Tell me about the other 5, she said.